are continental equivalent post offices where they are operating in a commercial environment, taking on board the new technology, competing in every possible sense, but are still in the public sector.
But this compromise formula that he's come up with today, that's no good as far as you're concerned?
No, and I don't think it's satisfactory for either the majority of those colleagues that have been referred to, or my constituents who really don't like the idea of privatisation. They don't think it's necessary, and I agree with them.
Why don't you think it's necessary? Give us a sketch of your objections to it.
Well, one could argue, for instance, in the case of water, there was a great need for massive public expenditure, and the Treasury wasn't going to come up with the money for that. Obviously, if you put it into the private sector, they can raise money on the money markets, and that's what has happened. Similarly with British Telecom, there was a need for great investment and public expenditure. Otherwise, it was privatised, and we've seen considerable benefits to the customer in price terms and better quality of service and more choice. But the post office is really rather different. You can't have two Royal Mails delivering letters to every post box. So it is really what competition that counts, and it's for the benefit of customers. There's no competition, I'm afraid, at the level of the postman delivering the letter through your letterbox.
But don't you accept that politically the government, and Mr. Heseltine personally, has staked an enormous amount on this? I mean, how far are you prepared to push it?
I think that if it goes further, there's a very considerable risk that the government will lose, actually, when a bill is before Parliament, and that would be far more damaging. I think that the government has a good escape position now. They can simply say, we have listened to what the public has said, because it's been clearly shown during the consultation that as many as 70 or 80% of people, and that goes for Conservative voters too, are really against privatisation, and we have listened to them.
I mean, it would be a colossal climb down, though, wouldn't it? You must have been under a great deal of pressure from the party whips over the past few days.
No, not at all, actually. I think
you seriously expect us to believe that? They haven't.
Well, I think obviously there's been pressure from ministers, but I don't believe that the party whips regard it as being in the interests of the party nationally or in Parliament to proceed with something on which they'd be defeated. I mean, they are realists, and they have to advise the Prime Minister, and I'm sure the Chief Whip isn't going to advise something which is going to end in defeat.
Well, we shall see. Gary Wallace, thank you for being with us. Well, now, later this afternoon, the Commons, which had expected to end early today, will hold an emergency debate on the latest drama in the so-called sleaze affair. MPs will attack the editor of The Guardian for using a forged fax bearing the House of Commons portcullis symbol to obtain information about Jonathan Aitken's hotel bill. This new twist in the relentless flow of stories about alleged lack of probity in public life has come at the end of a parliamentary year in which the very fabric of the state appears to be under attack. At the ritual opening of the parliamentary year, Britain's institutions had looked healthy enough. The Queen, flanked by her lords spiritual and temporal, royalty, church and state gathered together for the annual declaration of the government's legislative programme for the year. But as the session she opened draws to a close, not one of these three pillars of state looks as secure as it did then.
My government attached the highest importance.
We shouldn't be. It is time to return to those old core values. Time to get back to basics.
It had begun well enough. At the Conservative conference a month earlier, John Major's position seemed more secure than at any time since his earliest days at Number 10. The party faithful loved what they saw as a new emphasis on personal morality. But there was a price to pay for that, when, soon after, the Environment Minister Tim Yeo was found to have transgressed, his constituency party left him with little choice but to resign. The press claimed more scalps as Back to Basics put backs to the wall. 2 parliamentary private secretaries quit over newspaper stories. Alan Duncan for the way he bought a cut-price council house from Westminster Council. Then Hartley Booth, Lady Thatcher's successor as MP for Finchley, for what he said was a platonic affair with his Commons researcher. And the Whip's office lost Michael Brown to Fight's allegations of a homosexual affair. Then Stephen Milligan's bizarre death at his West London home added to the growing list of scandals. And the mood of decline went beyond personal morality. For the government itself was under fire. The Scott inquiry began investigating whether ministers had secretly changed the rules on arms sales to Iraq. Even the highest weren't immune. And new doubts were cast on political morality when William Wardgrave, whose responsibility included open government, told a Commons committee that he supported the Cabinet Secretary's view that it might be legitimate to mislead Parliament.
What Sir Robin was saying, that in exceptional cases, and I imagine he was using, as he did believe before the Scott inquiry, the example of devaluation, which I don't think anyone would doubt, it is necessary to say something that is untrue to the House of Commons.
But how true were the questions some members of the House were asking? The Cash for Questions affair began when the Sunday Times alleged that 2 Conservatives were prepared to accept money for tabling Commons questions. David Tredynick was suspended from his job as a ministerial aide. So was Graham Riddick, who believed that the Sunday Times reporters had set him up.
I was the victim of an elaborate Sunday Times scam.
Other Conservatives hit back against the press.
Who are these members of the Fourth Estate anyway? Who are these so-called guardians of the public interest who are arrogating to themselves exceptional powers and rights?
And when Mohammed Al-Fayed, the owner of Harrods, decided to make allegations about ministers in The Guardian, Tory resentment was even greater. The Guardian featured a series of stories that claimed first Tim Smith from the Northern Ireland office, then Neil Hamilton, the minister responsible for business probity. But when the paper gave details about Jonathan Aitken's stay at the Ritz Hotel in Paris, the Conservative fightback began. Their ammunition came in the form of the so-called cod facts on what looked like House of Commons notepaper, and purporting to come from Mr. Aitken's office, which the newspaper sent to the hotel to obtain a copy of his bill.
We didn't use notepaper, we used a logo off a letter we had. Of course, I have, as I've said several times recently, regret that we used that particular logo as opposed to some other logo, because it's clearly touched a wellspring of indignation in the House of Commons, which is helping to distract attention from the story we were actually doing and continue to do.
But Tory MPs were not satisfied with Mr. Preston's justification that he simply wanted to protect his sources, and they began baying for blood.
If Mr. Al-Fayed requires a Guardian forgery in order to resolve his conscience, what, in my right honourable friend's mind, does that tell us about Mr. Al-Fayed or the Guardian or both?
Not only has he been using House of Commons writing paper to forge letters, but also he's been forging other people's signatures.
If a newspaper is found to have used the name of this House to give false authority to its activities, that newspaper deserves to lose the respect and confidence of this House.
And the Speaker agreed that the Guardian and Mr. Preston had a case to answer.
I am accordingly prepared for a motion to be given precedence at the commencement of business at 3:30 p.m. tomorrow. For the avoidance of doubt, the essential issue to be covered is the alleged action of the Guardian newspaper in representing that a letter sent by it to the Ritz Hotel Paris was sent in the name of an honourable member of this House. Thank you.
So, Tory MPs at least are united in furious indignation over the Guardian's behaviour. They've smelt blood and, metaphorically speaking, they want the head of the paper's editor, Peter Preston. If, as expected, MPs vote to summon Mr. Preston before a meeting of the Privileges Committee, what sort of reception can he expect? 23 years ago, the Daily Mail's lobby correspondent Gordon Gregg was hauled before the committee for writing a story based on a leaked draft of the civil list. He told me what the experience was like.
Well, I think it's pretty rough. I mean, there are no hostages. They really, really do give it to you. They want to find the source. You've actually broken the club rules. There's no question of that. I mean, if you go have a look at Erskine May, there's page after page after page of their privileges, of what the Commons rights are, and you've actually breached one of those rules. And so they're really out to really nail you to the wall if they can. And that goes for MPs as well.
Was it unexpectedly tough? I mean, did you think you could walk in there and just get away with it?
Oh, well, I think I was quite self-confident. I was sort of buoyed up in the fact that I'd got the story. But of course, the process does drag on. I mean, it was some weeks after the story had broken that I was actually called up before the committee. And by that time, you could see all the problems arising. But I think I was pretty self-confident. But I must say I came out feeling as I'd got the manacles on, and I was about to be led to the tower and the block. It was I mean, they're very, very, the only way to describe it is mean. I mean, it's direct, very hard questioning. You've got no help at all. I mean, a journalist, I think, would probably quite need his office lawyer. And There was nothing of that. You sit there by yourself and you have to, you know, it comes in from all sides.
Do you think there was an element of MPs getting their own back on an uppity reporter? There's sort of element of revenge?
Yes, I think that, yes, of course there's that. But I mean, I can quite conceive the situation where they're going to get their own back on an MP who's broken the rules too, and they're probably harder on an insider, somebody who actually is there, than an outsider. But no, they're out to find out why you broke the rules, how you broke the rules.
So was the experience sufficiently unpleasant that it made you change the way you work as a journalist?
Unfortunately, no, not at all. No, I mean, a story is a story, whatever it is, and you take most enormous risks. I should say, when you ask me about how unpleasant it was, the editor of the day, the deputy editor, actually went in, and he was in for half an hour, and I waited in the committee corridor, and he came out, and he was, I think he was pretty deflated too, and quite shocked by the cross-questioning and interrogation he went through, and he just came across to me and said, never ever put me through that again.
Gordon Gregg of the Daily Mail, but how much support does Peter Preston of The Guardian have among his peers? With me in the studio is David Banks, who's editorial director of Mirror Group newspapers, and joining us from Canary Wharf in the city is Charles Moore, editor of the Sunday Telegraph. Charles Moore, do you support Peter Preston and what he's done?
No, I don't. I think he shouldn't have done it. It was a deception, and it was unworthy.
Some say it's a resigning matter. Do you think so?
No, I wouldn't have thought so. I mean, he's resigned from the Press Complaints Commission. That seems the right thing to do. I think it's an apologising matter.
David Banks, what's your view on this?
I take completely the opposite line. I don't see how it was a deception. It deceived no one. It was by pre-arrangement with Al Fayed, who is the owner of the Ritz. I don't see how it's unworthy. It enters a higher calling, the highest calling of journalism, which is to investigate and substantiate allegations.
Why would you forge anything except to deceive someone? It didn't deceive. It was intended to deceive the general public, so that people didn't realise that Mr. Fayed had been telling people about his customers' bills, and Peter Preston himself admits that. And the reason for saying that, and for trying to practice that deception, is so that people won't be put off going to the Ritz. Well, I think people should know, if that's what Mr. Fayed's doing, people should know about it. And they certainly shouldn't be deceived about that, and nor should Mr. Aitken and Mr. Aitken's private secretary be used in this way.
Well, let's let David Banks answer that.
No brief for Mr. Al Fayed, the Ritz, or even its customers, Charles. You know more about them than I. However, I fail to see why Peter Preston is being put on trial here, much less by his peers in his own industry, as well as by the House of Commons, for answering the calling of a journalist.
David Banks, do you accept that the ends justify the means in most circumstances?
In most circumstances, yes.
So
and certainly in this circumstance. I think if you have to use Charles's terms, if you have to practice a minor deception to investigate and to uncover a larger deception, in terms of utilitarianism, the means do justify the end.
So this was a minor deception, Charles Moore?
You don't have to do that, and Peter Preston has admitted that in this case. He didn't need to practice this deception in order to get the information at all.
How else would he have achieved that information, Charles?
He got that information from Mr. Fayed, and Mr. Fayed had copies of the bill. The only reason he practiced the deception was to protect Mr. Fayed, and he was only protecting Mr. Fayed because otherwise potential customers of the Ritz would know that you can't trust Mr. Fayed with his bill. So there was nothing to do with the discovery of the information.
He was protecting a source. He was eager to have in his possession a copy of the bill, which he didn't have. He had seen the bill, but in a court of law, having seen it, that's not going to stand up anywhere.
No, he could have got it from Mr. Fayed if Mr. Fayed wasn't worried about his
potential...
potential...
Mr. Fayed was reluctant to allow him to have this.
Well, I understand that, but I don't see
we're going
why...
down this track, and we are chasing the wrong fox here.
John, no, can I just put a question to you? Do you think that this has set back the cause of investigative journalism?
Sorry, I didn't hear. Is that a question to me?
Yes.
Well, I think it does matter what methods you use in these things. People should start out in a civilized society with the presumption that the people they're dealing with are honourable and therefore deserve to be treated fairly. Of course, it may turn out that they aren't honourable, but on the whole, one must start with that presumption, and that presumption would apply to a government minister as it would to an ordinary citizen. And I think to start playing these games shows a great arrogance. And if you imagine it the other way round, suppose that Mr. Aitken had used forged Guardian paper to try and find out what the Guardian was up to in investigating him. Imagine the outrage from many of my colleagues, all of our colleagues, and indeed it would be outrage from me too if that had happened. He wouldn't have escaped with that for a moment.
I fail really to see the correctness of the analogy there. The fact is that Mr. Aitken had been approached by the Guardian quite properly with a presumption of innocence, had been questioned, had been, according to Mr. Preston, less than frank and reluctant to go any further. There was no other way that Peter Preston and his team could achieve the substantiation of the allegations that they needed.
Can we turn a corner very slightly, Charles Moore? One of your journalistic colleagues wrote this morning that when MPs unite in furious indignation, what are they trying to hide? Isn't that the point, really, that there are serious questions of probity in public life which are being obscured by this whole affair?
Well, I think there are some serious questions here, but I think that parliamentary privileges exist for a good reason. These are our elected representatives, and we fought over a long period of our history to make sure that Parliament couldn't be controlled by forces outside Parliament, because that would be an assault on our liberty. That was what a great deal of the Civil War was about. And the idea that MPs are only trying to save their skins, though of course some of them sometimes are, is ridiculous. These things do matter, and they matter just as much as freedom of the press. Both matter, and both should go together, and each should respect the other and try to play fair.
We must accept, though, they've seized upon this with undisguised relish, haven't they? It's come at exactly the right time for them.
Well, yes, that's absolutely true, but I don't really think you can blame them for that. I mean, in that sense, there's a game going on between politicians and the press, and if these MPs see that they seize their advantage, that's reasonable, just as we would do the opposite.
David Banks, a game is a rather high-risk one.
Indeed. Well, the trouble with that game is that the people who are being duped and who are being fouled in this game between politicians and press, it seems to me, in that case, are the public. I mean, deceptions and the use of House of Commons notepaper never seemed to matter when it was Lady Thatcher's husband who was using Downing Street notepaper to write hurry-up notes to ministers of the Crown several years ago. It didn't seem to matter 12 months ago when it was somebody from the Serious Fraud Office, a lawyer, who used David Steele's House of Commons notepaper to implicate him in a serious fraud inquiry. Then it was seen to be an April Fool's joke. If it's all right for April Fool's jokes and the husband of the Prime Minister, then I fail to see why we're suddenly so terribly enraged that the editor of The Guardian has used this perfectly proper device to substantiate allegations.
Well, I, for one, was horrified when Mr. Banks in his newspaper used a method of deception so that they could photograph the Princess of Wales in a private club exercising. I didn't think that was in the public interest. I thought it was a disgraceful intrusion on the Princess, as it would be on anyone exercising in a private club. And I think that if we're talking about the interests of the public, we cannot assume that any form of inquiry we make and any means we use are necessarily justified. We are behaving very badly towards fellow citizens sometimes when we do this, and that is not in the public interest.
Right. We've got to end shortly, but I'd just like to put to both of you the point that this might all lead to legislation by revenge. The government might decide to legislate in the new Parliament to crack down further on the press. Briefly, both of you. David Banks first, what do you think? Yeah,
possibly. I think there was a clear threat in the Prime Minister's rather guarded words in the House yesterday to journalists that if this is what they saw as investigative journalism and that the means always justified the ends, or the ends always justified the means, that they should take warning. Yes, I think that might well be the case. That would be a tragedy. A tragedy.
Charles Moore, in 30 seconds or so, what do you feel?
Well, I think legislation by revenge would be very bad, and self-regulation would be better. But self-regulation isn't working very well, and Peter Preston is on the Press Complaints Commission, which is the great self-regulating body, and he should have known better.
Charles Moore, David Banks, thank you both very much for being in the studio. And we're going to go to the Commons now. There is, in fact, a 10-minute rule bill just before we get to this debate about sleaze, but we'll hear more from Tudor Lomas, who's in the Commons.
Yes, Mike, welcome to the Chamber. We're coming towards the end now of Foreign Office questions. The Chamber's been filling up steadily over the last half hour. It's still not full by any means. Tony Newton, the Leader of the Commons, is present, and he's going to be speaking for the government from the front bench on this political sleaze debate, and Anne Taylor will be speaking from the opposition bench. I'm told that Peter Preston is there in the press gallery. He's watching proceedings.
Madam Speaker.
We're now moving on to a question about exports of the United Kingdom's goods to Far Eastern countries.
Help, advice and support. They provide exporters with targeted information about opportunities for their products and help exporters identify overseas representatives. They also give background information about local firms with whom British companies plan to do business. We attach high priority to expanding exports to the rapidly growing Far Eastern market. By using savings made elsewhere, manpower resources devoted to commercial work in Asia and the Pacific Rim have risen by 23% since 1990. Last year, 28 new frontline posts, commercial jobs, were created in Japan, South Korea, Hong Kong, Singapore, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia and Thailand. I'm glad to say that exports to the region rose by 28.5% in 1993 to £13 billion.
Mr. O'Brien.
Madam Speaker, in view of the fact that over the past years there's been a greater emphasis on the export of arms and military equipment by this government, can we be assured now that there will be a greater emphasis on the more domestic products and that assistance will be given to exporters, particularly in West Yorkshire, so that we can develop the export trade to the Far East?
Madam Speaker, I have visited Yorkshire and spoken to exporters, and I give the honourable gentleman the assurance that they will get all the help that we can give them.
Time's up. Mr. Wilson.
Madam Speaker,
Ron Wilson from the Labour front bench.
You'll recall, Madam Speaker, that the Secretary of State for Trade and Industry came to the House some time ago and made a statement based on the options set out in the white paper in the Post Office. It now seems, Madam Speaker, that these options which were described to the House have been cast aside and that fresh proposals are being cobbled together on an ad hoc basis and are being discussed, Madam Speaker, at this very moment in an upstairs room. Madam Speaker, can this House have a statement on the options for the Post Office, and can it be communicated to the Secretary of State that the future of the Royal Mail and the Post Office are not matters to be dealt with in this way as a bartering process among Conservative MPs?
The honourable gentleman will have seen there are appropriate ministers on the Treasury bench, but as far as I'm concerned, I have not been told by any government minister that they are seeking to make a statement on that matter today. I had, in fact, to quiet house, I had in fact anticipated there would be a point of order for me today about the events that took place last night when the Committee on Privileges closed. However, as there is no point of order, let me tell the House that I regard them. I can manage to cope with it anyway without one. Let me tell the House that it is a matter of great seriousness, and I regard it as a matter of great importance. What has taken place could have repercussions for the working of the whole of our system of select committees. Clearly, the matter has privilege aspects. Order? Order, I'm on my feet. Has the honourable gentleman got a point of order in the middle of all of this?
I don't know what you're talking about. What
Order. Perhaps tomorrow, when it is printed, the honourable gentleman will do me the courtesy of looking at the Hansard report. As I was saying, clearly the matter has privilege aspects, and for this reason, I could have insisted that it was first raised with me in writing. But because of its importance, and because this is the last full working day of the session, I have decided exceptionally to make an interim ruling today. That ruling is that the Committee of Privileges must have an opportunity to make a report on this matter to this House before the House takes any action. Members will find described on page 136 of Erskine May the practice of the House whereby, I quote, a matter alleged to have arisen in committee but not reported by it, may not generally be brought to the attention of the House on a complaint of breach of privilege, unquote. The purported written report from the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Chesterfield, was issued, so I understand, after the conclusion of yesterday's meeting of the Committee of Privileges. The committee has therefore not yet had the opportunity of making a report on it to the House of the kind to which I have just referred. I hope that following its next meeting, the committee will make such a report so that the House can have an early opportunity to consider this matter in an orderly manner and to take any action which it may think fit. And for these reasons, I do not propose to take any further points of order on this matter today. The House knows exactly where it stands, if it has listened very carefully to all my words. Now we can move on with a 10-minute rule motion, Mr. Roger Berry.
This 10-minute rule motion relates to Mr. Berry's experience of trying to introduce a disabled persons bill.
For a system of consultation when legislation relating to disabled persons is proposed, and to set rules for formulating compliance cost assessments in the case of such legislation. Madam Speaker, the House will be aware that the government has recently consulted on its proposals to tackle discrimination against disabled people. The House will also be aware that this was in response to the overwhelming support for the Civil Rights Disabled Persons Bill, and no doubt accounts for the attendance in the chamber at this time, Madam Speaker. Support for the Civil Rights Bill, both inside and outside of this House, I'm sure did encourage the government to put forward its own proposals, and I'm sure that its consultation document was also in response to the widespread disquiet at the manner in which the government blocked that bill temporarily. Nevertheless, I welcomed the consultation exercise, not least because in issuing that consultation document, the government made it quite clear that disabled people do face systematic discrimination and that they believe that this must be tackled through legislation. And I have to say, Madam Speaker, I therefore, with other honourable members, eagerly await the government's publication of the results of that consultation exercise and further debate on that issue. In the meantime, my bill today is a modest attempt to address and correct some of the very serious limitations in that consultation exercise. Madam Speaker, I think the main issues that we have to consider are the way in which consultation exercises are undertaken and the misuse of so-called compliance cost assessments. For example, it has been said by very many, including the Prime Minister, that the price tag of the Civil Rights Disabled Persons Bill is £17 billion. As I shall demonstrate, that figure has no basis in fact whatsoever, and the very fact that a document could come up with that figure claiming to be a compliance cost assessment suggests to me that we should very carefully review the rules for compliance cost assessments in order that we can have truthful figures produced and not figments of people's imagination. In relation to the consultation process, my bill recognises that, of course, the government may consult on whatever proposals it wishes to. No question about that. But disabled people have felt and still feel that in relation to the recent consultation exercise, it was regrettable that the government refused to consult on the one proposal for tackling discrimination against disabled people that disabled people themselves wanted, namely the Civil Rights Bill. Indeed, I've recently received a communication from the Spastic Society, and I'm sure that members of the House would wish to join with me in congratulating the Society on becoming scope tomorrow. I received a communication from the Society pointing out that they regretted that the government had excluded from their consultation exercise items that featured in the Civil Rights Bill. And that is a comment that has been made by organisations of and for disabled people up and down the country. My bill, therefore, has some very modest proposals to make. It would require that the government, in a consultation exercise in the future, would include with its own proposals on matters relating to disabled people any proposals on the same matter that disabled people themselves supported. Secondly, and that seems to me perfectly reasonable, Madam Speaker, Secondly, I think it would be perfectly reasonable to say that in future, any proposed consultation by the government on these matters should include any proposed legislation that has received an unopposed second reading in this chamber. It is not every day of the week that a bill is carried by 231 votes to nil at second reading. It expresses a view of this House. That view should have been subject to consultation. Thirdly, my bill would require that any legislation that had successfully completed its committee stage should also be a matter for proper consultation. And finally, any legislation that had completed either of those two requirements in the other place should also be subject to consultation. Now, Madam Speaker, I am sure that honourable members are reasonable and, well, I don't want to over-egg it, I am sure that honourable members would agree that any proposed legislation that had passed any one of those four tests, let alone all of them, should be worthy of detailed consultation in the kind of exercise the government has just engaged in. Now, Madam Speaker, the second issue addressed in my bill relates to compliance cost assessments in the case of proposed legislation. I have to say the phrase compliance cost assessment sounds very grand. There are indeed those who think that it's a widely accepted technique for evaluating policy, whether by economists or anybody else. It isn't, and in my view, any self-respecting economist wouldn't touch many of these compliance cost assessments with a barge pole. Indeed, it's the appalling errors in the compliance cost assessment on the Civil Rights Bill that lead me to suggest new rules for compliance cost assessments today. I don't believe they're controversial, but they're worth stating. First, compliance cost assessments should refrain from counting the same thing twice. Double counting, whether by accident or by design, obviously inflates the costs. Now, that may be welcome to some people who oppose a piece of legislation, but it hardly brings such exercises into good repute. For example, the compliance cost assessment on the Civil Rights Bill includes costs of providing access to existing buildings in the environment section. Now, some of those costs are counted yet again in the sections on employment and education. There is double counting that accounts for 6 billion of the alleged 17 billion figure. And the second thing that compliance cost assessments should not do is to assume a phasing-in period that is not in the proposed legislation. In relation to the Civil Rights Bill, it was assumed that everything would be done in 5 years. Madam Speaker, the 5-year period does not feature in the bill. And if we allow for proper phasing in transport, we actually reduce the cost by yet another £6 billion. Madam Speaker, I am running short of time. Suffice it to say...
you're not interested in the disabled,
and I appreciate why some opponents of the bill might feel happy about that. But might I simply say, the £17 billion figure should never ever be used again on the government's own assumptions. If we avoid double counting and inventing time periods that aren't in the bill, we're already down to 5 billion. And finally, the benefits. The benefits. Compliance cost assessments should be required to take into account the benefits of legislation as well. It has been estimated that discrimination excludes disabled people from the labour market at a cost of between £3 and £5 billion each year. The cost of inaccessible transport is £1 billion each year. Madam Speaker, my bill today would ensure that in future much more meaningful consultation on legislation relating to disabled people and much more meaningful cost-benefit analyses would take place. Like the Civil Rights Bill, the bill today has all party support and I commend it to the House.
The question is, the honourable member have leave to bring in his bill? As men in that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Mr. Speaker, John Austin Walker, Tom Clark, David Congdon, Jean Corsten, Don Dixon, Sir John Hannam, Alan Howarth, Liz Lynn, Gordon McMaster, Alf Morris, David Wigley, and myself.
Roger Berry. Mr. Berry.
So in a moment, when Mr. Roger Berry has presented his bill formally, we'll be moving on to the debate on privilege. That will be moved by Mr. David Wiltshire, a Conservative MP, who was the first person to write to the Speaker, drawing attention to what he says in the motion is the alleged action of the Guardian newspaper in representing that a letter sent by it to the Ritz Hotel in Paris was sent in the name of an honourable member of this House, and to move that the matter be referred to the Committee of Privileges. As I say, that will be moved by David Wiltshire.
Perfectly well, as far back as the 10th of May, that a letter had been written on House of Commons paper in these circumstances. In these circumstances, should we really give precedence above other business to this debate at this time, given when they knew about it, and also given the fact that your statement rather alters events?
Yes, Mr. Madden.
Madam Speaker, further to that point of order, the motion on privileges is extremely narrowly drawn, as you reminded us when we considered a similar motion earlier this week. Clearly, in this debate, there will be a very strong temptation, in view of last night's events, for members on both sides to discuss the proceedings of the Privileges Committee, a matter which you warned us very much against previously, and I'm sure you're going to warn us very much against today. Secondly, I would put to you, Madam Speaker, that anyone voting for this motion today cannot have any idea at all whether, if carried, the complaint is going to be considered by the Privileges Committee in public or in private, or how the proceedings of the committee are going to be arranged.
Could I have the point of order for me to deal with, please?
My point of order is, Madam Speaker, in view of what I have said, I believe that consideration of this motion today is premature, and therefore I would ask if it could be withdrawn to enable us to consider it when the proceedings of the Privileges Committee are themselves clear and made known to the House.
No, I can deal with these now, thank you very much. I've had to, and I think I've captured the mood of the House on this matter, actually. The motion before us today, there's certainly no conflict between that motion and the statement that I made earlier. The motion is in perfect order, it is now ready for the debate, and this House has the responsibility, quite frankly, at this stage, of dealing with this motion now. Now I call Mr. David Wiltshire to move the motion. Point of order.
As you will know, Madam Speaker, that over the course of your period in the chair, and indeed before that, there have been countless occasions, almost every year, of some people using House of Commons note paper in a fashion that they shouldn't have, and other people outside this House using it. Can you tell me on how many occasions there have been people using the note paper that haven't had these matters brought before the Committee of Privileges?
Of course, I can't give the honourable gentleman a figure at this stage, but I shall certainly have some research done and do my best to respond to it. It isn't a matter of a point of order for me, but I'm always willing to give as much information as I can to individual members. Now, Mr. Wiltshire, move the motion.
Thank you, Madam
And the
Speaker.
debate
I beg to
begins.
move the motion standing on today's order paper in my name. Madam Speaker, there are occasions when I would give my eye teeth to address this House in prime time and on an important issue, but this isn't one of those occasions. This debate opens up all sorts of predictable criticism and offers us assorted traps into which we can all fall. I fully understand that in a debate like this, it would be very easy indeed to sound pompous, sanctimonious, and utterly party political. But when seeking to defend our collective reputations, and more importantly, when seeking to defend the status and symbols of this House, there is always going to be a risk of allegations of hypocrisy, of oversensitivity, and of being out of touch. But whilst this debate is of necessity about the possible abuse of the House and about a contempt of Parliament, I hope that the entire House would be just as concerned if the victim of this alleged conspiracy, of this alleged impersonation and this alleged forgery were the proverbial Joe Bloggs, whose letter heading did not contain a portcullis or the words House of Commons.
May I say to the honourable gentleman that I would have much more sympathy with the case that he's
Tony
made.
Banks interviewing.
If indeed this... If indeed this information about the use of a piece of notepaper purporting to come from a member for South Thanet had actually been brought to the House's attention when indeed the member himself knew about it. He knew about it on the 10th of May. The Cabinet Secretary knew on the 18th of May. Why wasn't the House so informed at that time if it is so important now?
As a member of the Complaints Committee.
Madam Speaker, I'm quite happy for other members to make their case in their way, but I prefer to make my case in the way that I think is best.
Look, this is a point for you. You've emphasized very understandably that this is a matter of precedence over other business. The fact of the matter is, as my honourable friend says, that this was known about in the public print on the 10th of May. The Cabinet Secretary wrote letters on the 18th of May. Why is it given precedence?
Order. The honourable gentleman cannot disrupt our proceedings in this way with points of order that are really not points of order. This has been... Order. This has been determined that this takes precedence today, and we must... This is responsibility and indeed the duty of this House. It is about time we faced up to some duties in this House. Mr. Wilshire.
Madam Speaker, I'm most grateful to my honourable friend in view of the points that have just been raised. Would my honourable friend accept from me that the Prime Minister and the Cabinet Secretary did apparently consider referring this to the Press Complaints Commission, but as at that time Mr. Peter Preston was a member of the Commission, they felt that it wasn't worth doing so?
That was Roger Gale from the Conservative backbenches.
Again, Madam Speaker, those are interesting points, but if I could press ahead...
Point of order. Can we now assume that the rules involving raising matters at the earliest possible moment no longer apply?
As I've told the House and the honourable gentleman, the motion before us and the way we are proceeding is completely in order with the business of this House and precedences which have stood us in good stead over very many years indeed. Mr. Wilshire.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. All that I can say is that as soon as I knew about it, I raised it with you on Monday morning. I also want to say, Madam Speaker, at the outset, that in saying what I say this afternoon, I don't seek to criticise all journalists and all editors when I criticise one, and that I make no claims at all to be better or different than anybody else. And I know that I certainly run the risk of setting myself up for abuse and for criticism, but so be it. That's the lot of all politicians. But, Madam Speaker, all I know is this, that if I was caught forging faxes, however much I felt I could justify it, I would expect to be pilloried by every newspaper in the land, and that's a fate I would richly deserve. And if, when I was found out, I indulged in self-righteous self-justification, I would quite rightly deserve the contempt of every fair-minded person. And again at the outset, I'm also anxious to try and avoid cheap party politics. And I guessed that would get a hollow laugh, Madam Speaker. All I can say is please hear me out and then judge at the end whether I'm playing party politics or not. Because, Madam Speaker, I'm relieved that you've made it clear that this debate must confine itself to very narrow issues. In fact, the issue is in my motion. Because that is exactly the issue I wanted to raise when I wrote to you on Monday. Whatever an honourable member in this House may or may not have done is not part of this issue, although I can quite understand why there are people in this House who want to pursue that story. I think that this issue is sufficiently important to require separate and immediate attention. What concerns us today is need of investigation. Madam Speaker, I say that for three very simple reasons. First, because I believe that those in a privileged position must be above reproach. Or at least that is the message I think the newspapers have been trumpeting to us these past few weeks. Now, I'm perfectly happy, very happy indeed, to accept that MPs are in a privileged position, even if most of us don't have much power. But I am clear in my mind that newspaper editors are in an equally privileged position and wield very substantial power indeed.
Does the honourable gentleman believe that Mr. Peter Preston acted in the public interest in revealing the fact that Conservative members of Parliament failed to register pecuniary interest? Does he believe that Mr. Preston acted in the public interest? Yes or no? Yes or no?
Dale Campbell Savers
the
from
honourable
Labour
gentleman
Backbenches.
would contain himself. If he heard me out, he'd get his answer to that one in due course. But as I was saying, Madam Speaker, I'm clear in my mind that a newspaper editor is in an equally privileged position and wields very substantial power indeed. And it follows, as far as I can see, that if they maintain that we should be above reproach, then so should they. My second reason for concern is this. I believe that two of the most important duties of all members of Parliament are to stand up for the rights of the individual and to stand up for the rule of law. And perhaps the greatest threat to both of those is the belief by people in powerful positions that the end justifies the means. Down that route, Madam Speaker, lurks the jackboot and the lynch mob. If I understand history correctly, this Parliament came into existence to protect the citizen from arbitrary abuse and from victimisation. And throughout this Parliament's history, we have regularly had to square up to the overmighty who seek to place themselves above the law. And my third reason is that there's been a total lack of a proper apology from the Guardian's editor. From time to time, all of us allow our enthusiasm to run away with us, and we do things that we later regret. When I do, Madam Speaker, I find people very willing to accept a proper apology, and I find myself wanting to hide quietly in a dark corner for quite a while. But not so the editor of The Guardian. Over the past few days, and again in last night's resignation letter, the nation has been treated to the mocking of decency and the mocking of honesty, and the attempted justification of deceit and deception. Madam Speaker, I turn now to the details of the allegations that give rise to this motion. Madam Speaker, I feel it better if I press on. I've been generous up to now. Because
attempt to intervene from the Labour benches.
To turn to the details of the allegations that give rise to this motion. My description of them is based on comments made by Mr. Preston, Mr. Al-Fayed, and reports in The Guardian. In the circumstances, these are all sources that I hope the House will find as reliable. Last autumn, Mr. Fayed told Mr. Preston about a Ritz hotel bill. Quite how or why, an extremely busy international tycoon found the time to interest himself in such a detailed matter isn't reported as far as I can discover. But Mr. Preston wanted a copy of this bill, while Mr. Al-Fayed wanted to protect his own and his hotel's reputation. So they concocted a plan to forge a fax. Now, Madam Speaker, I'm not a lawyer, but...
I seek your guidance, Madam Speaker.
Another point of order.
Is it that we are debating today whether this topic should go for consideration by the committee, or are we discussing the matters that ought to be discussed by the committee at a later date?
Very good point of order. In fact, what we are discussing today is whether we refer this matter to the Privileges Committee. It is a very, very narrow motion indeed. I was just looking at it for the umpteenth time yet again. But there has to be references made, but I hope those references will not be in any detail, that they will be brief. But let us all keep in mind, all we are considering is whether this matter should go to the Privileges Committee for detailed investigation there. I hope that all honourable members will keep that in mind.
If you've switched on expecting to watch Today's the Day, it's been rescheduled till later this afternoon because of this emergency Commons debate on what's being called political sleaze. It can now be seen at 5:30 this afternoon.
Now, I'm no lawyer, but that sounds like a criminal conspiracy to me. And as a result, Mr. Preston arranged for the top of a letter from my right honourable friend on official House of Commons stationery to be stuck to the top of a fax so as to make it appear that it came from an MP. Again, Madam Speaker, I'm no lawyer, but that sounds remarkably like forgery to me. And finally, Mr. Preston worded the fax to suggest that the sender was my right honourable friend's private secretary. Lawyers I've spoken to, Madam Speaker, tell me that that sounds remarkably like impersonation. Thus it appears to me that Mr. Preston has not only admitted to an abuse of Parliament, but to criminal activity. That is why I've referred this matter to the police as well. No. Madam Speaker, I've detained the House long enough, and I just want to say a couple more points, then I'm sure you could call the honourable gentleman if he's on your list. Madam Speaker, I can actually think of no better way to sum up my case than to quote something that I heard on Radio 4 on Monday morning. This is what I heard. I think that anyone other than a member of Parliament writing on parliamentary paper is unacceptable. And I think that there does need to be some investigation into exactly what happened. I don't think that it's right that other than members of Parliament take on that role. And I think there are some questions that need to be answered there. Madam Speaker, I agree with every word of that comment made by the Right Honourable Lady, the member for Dewsbury, Labour's shadow leader of this House. Thus, the Honourable Lady and I stand united across the party political divide, which is why I want this matter referred to the Privileges Committee, and which is why I want to hear their verdict and their views on possible punishment, and which is why I would also welcome the verdict of a jury and the punishment handed down by a judge. I beg to move.
Question is the motion on the order paper. Leader of the House.
Madam Speaker.
Another point.
The Leader of the House is the chairman of the committee which will deal with this matter. He used his casting vote on a previous occasion, and I've no doubt that if the meeting takes place again, he'll use it in this particular instance. And I want to know why it is that he can take part in this debate, leading on behalf of the government, when he's going to act as judge and jury in the future.
Madam Speaker, as I had indicated to you, I felt it appropriate to say a word, but really only 2 sentences. The first is that as Leader of the House, I hope the House will accept my honourable friend's motion. The second is that as Chairman of the Committee of Privileges, I think the House will understand that it would not be appropriate for me to comment beyond that.
Madam Speaker, I too will be brief because I believe that the matter before the House today is relatively straightforward and that the motion is a very narrow motion. I listened carefully to what the honourable gentleman said in moving his motion, and I must say at the outset that I regret very much the extravagant and intemperate language that I believe he used and which did not help his case. Madam Speaker, the basis of this campaign, the basis of this complaint is that the editor of the... Madam Speaker, if we can consider this carefully, I think it would do the House a great deal of good because this is an extremely important issue. The basis of the complaint that the honourable gentleman made in respect of allegations that the editor of The Guardian used House of Commons notepaper and forged the signature of a member of the staff of a member of this House is indeed very serious. And you, Madam Speaker, on Monday instigated enquiries through the Sergeant-at-Arms, and we have before us today a motion that this matter be referred to the Committee of Privileges. Clearly, there is a prima facie case that there has been a breach of parliamentary privilege. And I want to repeat what I said on Monday morning and what the honourable gentleman quoted. I made it clear as soon as I heard of the allegations against Mr. Peter Preston that for anyone other than a member of Parliament to use official notepaper is completely unacceptable, as it clearly is for anyone to forge any signature. This is unacceptable behaviour for an editor of a newspaper or indeed for anyone else. Anyone who receives a letter on House of Commons notepaper has to be able to believe that that letter is genuine, not least in order to protect our ability to serve our constituents. When we write to doctors, lawyers, or indeed anyone else, the recipient must have confidence that that letter is genuine. This reference to the Committee of Privileges is therefore entirely inevitable and entirely appropriate. I do not, therefore, seek to defend the actions of the editor of The Guardian, nor to justify them. Mr. Preston has said that in retrospect he may have been wrong to do what he did. He was wrong, he was wrong, he was foolish, and it is right that the committee considers his action. Madam Speaker, the committee will, I hope, also consider when members of this House first knew of that fact and of that forgery that is the subject of this inquiry. It is important that the committee finds out who knew about the forgery, when they knew about the forgery, and why, if members of Parliament knew that there had been a flagrant breach of this kind, they did not report it earlier to you, Madam Speaker. Statements have been made in today's...
Be most grateful. Why does the Right Honourable Lady think that there is any relevance into the timing of this? The important thing is either it was done or it was not done. I gather from what she is saying that she thinks it is thoroughly wrong to have done it. It's against the principles and the rules of this House, and that is the end of the matter.
Madam Speaker, I think that any member of this House who finds out that there has been a flagrant breach of privilege has a responsibility to report such a breach to this House. And I think it's entirely right that the Committee of Privileges should look at this matter in addition to the other details that have been mentioned. Statements have been made in today's press that Cabinet members, including the Prime Minister, as well as the Chief Secretary, knew all about this misuse of Commons paper several months ago. And it is not for the House this afternoon to consider this in detail, but I believe it is relevant to the inquiry, and I hope that the committee will take this aspect on board. Madam Speaker, the fact that Mr. Preston was wrong should not be used as a reason for ignoring the issues that Mr. Preston was raising, and indeed the evidence that has come to light. Mr. Preston might claim that he used a foolish device to verify essential evidence and to protect his source of information. It is, I think, interesting that no one has challenged the factual information that Mr. Preston presented, nor are those facts challenged by this debate.
He surely is trying to change the facts totally. Surely what has happened here is a conspiracy by Mr. Preston to try to hide the fact he was working with a blackmailer in trying to bring down this government.
That was Ian Bruce from the Conservative Ventures.
I'm sure that the Committee of Privilege will hear everything that is said, and I'm sure also some honourable friends are saying that it would be wise not to make allegations of this kind outside of this House.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and without disagreeing at all with a word that she said, would she acknowledge that under paragraph 7 of the Code of Conduct of the Press Complaints Commission, while it says that subterfuge should not be used, it does say that it is possible in the public interest, and that the code, and that code was generally approved by the government.
Madam Speaker, I think it is interesting to note that when attempts have been made to increase the accountability of the press by members on this side of the House, they have generally been blocked by members on the other side. Madam Speaker, what is under consideration today is one aspect of the means used to obtain information. The ends do not justify the means, but neither do the means invalidate the attempts to raise issues of genuine and important public concern. The methods adopted do, of course, raise very big questions, and we should not lose sight of the fact that journalists and others are trying to prize out information because we do not have a sufficiently transparent system of accountability in this country. If we had a better system of registering interests, both of members of Parliament and indeed of government ministers, then this might not have happened. We now do have the Nolan Committee looking at some of...
Very rightly told the House this was a very narrow debate. It seems that the Honourable Lady is attempting to make some rather party political points at this stage.
I'm listening to this debate very carefully, and I think the honourable gentleman can leave it in my hands. The moment the honourable lady is doing perfectly all right, and I believe she's just coming to a close, if you'd allow her to do so.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I was, in fact, reaching my conclusion that I have tried not to be partisan because I think that these issues are in the interest of all of us. Madam Speaker, we now do have the Nolan Committee looking at some of these wider issues, but I believe it is important that the House looks at these as well. This issue, this matter of Mr. Preston's action, must be referred to the Privileges Committee, and I hope that members of that committee will look at the full issues that are raised by this reference.
Mr. Roger Dale. Yes, now, who shall I start with? I think Mr. Ben.
Madam Speaker, I rise on a point of order coming from what was said by the mover of the motion. He said that he had reported this matter simultaneously to the police. Now, for many, many years, the House, which has a jurisdiction of its own, has kept a wide boundary between its own jurisdiction and the jurisdiction of the courts. If this is to be pursued in the courts, with presumably a prosecution for forgery, while the committee is handling the matter, we could be in difficulties. The second point arises, well, I hope the House will listen, because I'm on a point of substance. Second point arises, if the case comes to the court, it will be heard in open court. When it comes to the Committee of Privileges, it will be heard in secret. And therefore, yes, that is the decision of the Committee of Privileges. Now, if Mr. Preston is referred to the Committee of Privileges and he asks for the right to tell or print through his newspaper what happened at the Committee of Privilege, he will then be guilty of another breach of privilege for revealing what the committee's proceedings have been. And, Madam Speaker, I'm drawing to your attention a very important question, because we've stumbled into this without thinking it out, in my opinion. Namely, there are two jurisdictions and two regimes, an open regime in the court, a private regime in the committee, and Mr. Preston, were he to be hauled up, would be put in an absolutely impossible position.
The honourable gentleman has an interesting point to make, but it is not a point of order to me. It is a speech that he might wish to make during the course of this debate. He has something maybe to say of substance. But it is a speech and it is not a point of order for at this particular time. Now let me deal with... Order! I have given my ruling. I have listened very... Just sit down a moment. I have listened very carefully to what the honourable gentleman has had to say. It is not a point of order at this stage. It is something the honourable gentleman might employ during the course of this debate. But it is not a point of order in which I can rule.
Very great regret. With very great respect, and no intention of speaking today. I spoke on Monday. What I'm putting to you is this, that by accepting a motion after we've been told it's going to another jurisdiction, the jurisdiction of the House is infringed. That is for you, not a matter of judgment for the House. It is for you to protect the jurisdiction of the court and to order the honourable member that if we do proceed, that he is not to take the matter to the court. Otherwise, the House of Commons' rights are being taken over by the courts.
Very careful consideration of this before the matter came before the House today. There is no sub judice involved in this. We are perfectly in order, as is the honourable gentleman, in moving this motion. I spent a good deal of time taking legal advice on this matter. We are perfectly in order in the way that we are proceeding. Yes, Mr. Walker.
Madam Speaker, can you confirm that one of the reasons why committees sit in secret is that the committee is collecting evidence? Now, that is also true when the police or anyone else investigate matters. It's done in secret. It's only when all the information has been looked into and collected and a report...
Order! What honourable members are attempting to do now is to conduct this debate through me. They must wait their opportunity for me to call them. Now, I hope there are going to be no more points of order. We must proceed with this debate. I'll have Mr. Gail Campbell-Savers, who hasn't had a point of order yet.
Madam Speaker, I was rising to speak.
I think, what a wise man. No, a little late to let me deal with these things. Yes, Mr. Madden.
Madam Speaker, the Honourable Lady for Dewsbury asked a number of questions which earlier other members had asked, and it was clear that the Honourable Member for Spelthorne was either unable or unwilling to answer those questions. Those questions relate